Imagine a place where young minds gather, where each student sits with their own dreams, their own stories, and hopes for a fair chance to learn. Now imagine, in that same room, a young girl named Jada, quiet, bright, and ready to give her best. She takes her seat, unaware of the lesson that lies ahead. Today, Jada becomes the center of a different kind of attention. A teacher stands at the front, a figure meant to guide, to support, to encourage. But as the minutes tick by, questions and remarks start to land with an edge, sharper than they should be, all directed her way. It's not the usual classroom energy. With each word, a weight fills the air, a tension that only one student seems to feel. Yet Jada remains steady, her eyes fixed ahead, her mind holding on to the purpose that brought her here. Little does her teacher know, Jada is more than just another face in this classroom. There's a reason she is here, a truth no one expects. And today, that truth will change everything. This is a story of resilience and the quiet power one can carry even in the face of unfairness. And as Jada's journey unfolds, it will challenge not just her, but everyone around her. Jada's first weeks in this classroom were like stepping into a new world. She was no stranger to feeling different. Moving from a diverse school environment to this small-town high school was a change. The halls were quiet, and the faces around her unfamiliar. Still, she approached each day with a sense of hope. After all, her father had just accepted a position as the new principal of this very school. It was a step up for him, a chance to shape a community he believed in. For Jada, it was a fresh start. She knew her father was proud of her, she wanted to make him even prouder by excelling here. But each day in Mr. Smith's classroom brought a different kind of challenge. At first, it was subtle, small remarks that seemed to have a hidden edge, as if they held a deeper meaning only meant for her. Mr. Smith, a seasoned teacher, was well liked by most students, respected by his colleagues, and known for his tough teaching style. To the other students, he was the kind of teacher you expected to push you, to hold you to high standards. But for Jada, something was different. She could feel it every time his eyes landed on her. It started with little things, comments about her handwriting, critiques of her answers that seemed harsher than those directed at her peers. Jada wondered if it was all in her head. She questioned herself, telling herself to work harder, to be better, to give him no reason to pick on her. Her friends from her old school might have said something right then and there, but here, she didn't feel that kind of confidence. Here, she felt alone. One day, during a history lesson on civil rights, Mr. Smith posed a question to the class. He asked about the importance of equality and freedom. Jada thought about it carefully, eager to share her perspective. Her hand went up slowly, and Mr. Smith nodded, letting her speak. As she explained her thoughts, her words full of sincerity, Mr. Smith's expression changed. He stopped her mid-sentence, his tone cool, dismissive. "That's a fine opinion, Jada," he said, the hint of sarcasm barely hidden. "But let's stick to the facts, not emotions. This isn't a place to bring in personal biases." The class fell silent, eyes shifting between Jada and the teacher. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, her confidence shrinking under his gaze. She was left wondering if her words had somehow threatened him, or if it was simply because she had dared to voice them at all. As the days passed, Jada's presence became a target in the class. Whenever she answered a question, Mr. Smith seemed to twist her responses, nitpicking on details, ignoring her efforts. Her grades in his class started to drop. She'd always been a strong student, proud of her grades, but here, nothing seemed good enough. There were days when she stayed late after school, trying to study harder, to meet his standards. Her father noticed her dedication, encouraged her, praised her determination. Jada wanted to tell him the truth, but something held her back. She didn't want to disrupt his work or make him worry. Then came the essay assignment. Mr. Smith asked each student to write about a moment in history that had personal significance to them, an event they believed had shaped the country. Jada saw this as her chance. She poured herself into the essay, writing about the civil rights movement, the sacrifices of her ancestors, and what it meant to her family today. She wanted Mr. Smith to understand that her history wasn't just a subject in a textbook, it was part of her identity. She stayed up late working on it, hoping her words would be enough. When she handed in her essay, Jada felt a small flicker of pride. She'd put everything she had into those pages, hoping to bridge some unspoken gap, to show Mr. Smith a part of herself he hadn't seen. The next day, Mr. Smith returned the essays. Jada could hardly contain her anticipation, imagining the possibility of a kind word, some small recognition of her effort. But when she saw her paper, her heart sank. In red ink, Mr. Smith had scrawled across the top, "This is overly sentimental and lacks objectivity." Her grade was a C-. She could hardly breathe, staring at the words, feeling a painful sting in her chest. All her hard work, all her honesty, reduced to overly sentimental. As she sat in that classroom, gripping the edges of her desk, Jada felt a decision take shape within her. She wasn't going to remain silent anymore. She decided she would talk to her father that evening, tell him everything. And for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of relief, a hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. That evening, at home, Jada found herself struggling with how to bring up the subject. Her father was in his study, reviewing school documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. When she knocked on the door and stepped inside, he looked up, his face softening at the sight of her. Jada took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her frustration and hurt begin to lift as she finally told him about Mr. Smith's treatment, the comments, the grades, the essay. Her father listened closely, his face growing serious. As she spoke, a quiet anger began to simmer in his eyes, but he let her finish without interruption. When she was done, he reached across the desk and took her hand, a silent promise that he would stand by her side. Jada saw the determination in his face and knew that something would change. The next morning, Jada's father, Principal Davis, arrived at school early. He had spent much of the previous night wrestling with a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, disappointment. This was his school, a place he had come to build something meaningful, to lead with integrity and fairness. Hearing his daughter's experience shattered his sense of safety for her and challenged everything he believed about the environment he was trying to cultivate. As the bell rang, he knew he had to handle this carefully. He wanted to confront Mr. Smith, but he also knew that change had to be more than a single conversation. As Principal Davis walked through the halls, the weight of his responsibility settled on him. He passed students laughing, hurrying to their classes, unaware of the brewing tension. He greeted teachers, smiled, nodded, and finally made his way to the faculty lounge, where he found Mr. Smith, sipping his morning coffee and reviewing his lesson plan. Their exchange started formally, a brief greeting, the usual pleasantries. But then, Davis paused, his tone shifting. "Mr. Smith," he began slowly, measuring each word. "I'd like to talk to you about something concerning, something that's come to my attention about the way certain students are being treated in your class." Mr. Smith looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, but he quickly masked it, his expression neutral. "Of course, Principal Davis. Is there a specific concern you'd like to address?" Principal Davis took a deep breath, steadying himself. "It has come to my attention that some of your students, particularly those of color, have been made to feel singled out. They feel their contributions are being dismissed or critiqued unfairly. I'm talking about my daughter, Jada, specifically, but also in a broader sense." Mr. Smith's expression hardened slightly, a hint of defensiveness flickering in his eyes. "With all due respect, Principal Davis, I hold all of my students to the same high standards, regardless of race. I expect nothing but the best from each of them. Jada may have felt singled out, but my approach is the same for everyone." Davis took a moment, studying Mr. Smith's face. He knew this wasn't just about high standards. The issue was deeper, more complex than Mr. Smith seemed willing to admit. Still, he chose his next words carefully. "Mr. Smith, high standards are one thing. Fairness, respect, and understanding are another. I'd like to think we both share a commitment to creating an environment where every student feels respected and encouraged to succeed. Let's work together to make sure that happens." Mr. Smith nodded, his face set in a controlled expression. "Of course, sir. I'll be mindful of my approach in the future." The conversation ended there, but Principal Davis knew that this would require more than just a few careful words. He would need to follow up, to keep an eye on the situation. He wasn't willing to let it slide, but he also knew that change would need to be gradual, perhaps even subtle. He left the faculty lounge with a sense of unfinished business, a feeling that something deeper still needed to be addressed. The next day, things felt different in Mr. Smith's classroom. He seemed on edge, aware of the principal's eyes on him. He still asked Jada questions, but this time, his tone was more measured, his words chosen more carefully. Jada could feel the shift, but she knew that one conversation wouldn't change his attitude. The tension remained, like an invisible line drawn between them, a line she hadn't crossed by choice but by circumstance. Then, another incident happened, a moment that sent ripples through the school. It was a Wednesday morning, and Mr. Smith was assigning a group project. He paired students off, each group a mix of personalities and backgrounds. J.𝗲𝗏 was partnered with a new student named Marcus, another black student who had recently moved to town. When Mr. Smith made the pairing, he made a pointed remark about how certain students might benefit from extra guidance. The words were vague, but the message was clear to J.𝗲𝗏 and Marcus. The comment spread quickly, whispered between students, some who laughed it off, others who felt the sting of its implication. Marcus, usually quiet and reserved, was visibly upset. He sat in silence, his shoulders tense, his gaze focused on the desk in front of him. J.𝗲𝗏 felt a surge of frustration, not just for herself but for him as well. She realized then that this wasn't just about her, it was about every student who had ever felt marginalized, overlooked, or judged unfairly. After class, J.𝗲𝗏 and Marcus found each other in the hallway. For a moment, they just stood there, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like he doesn't even see us, you know? Like we're just here, but not really here." J.𝗲𝗏 nodded, her voice steady. "We have to do something. This can't keep happening." The two of them decided to talk to other students, to share their experiences and see if anyone else felt the same way. Over the next few days, J.𝗲𝗏 and Marcus found more students willing to speak up, to voice their concerns about the treatment they'd faced. Together, they decided to organize a meeting, a safe space where students could share their stories, their frustrations, and their hopes for change. Word spread quickly, and by the time the day of the meeting arrived, the room was packed. Students of all backgrounds, races, and grades filled the seats, their faces a mix of hope and determination. Principal Davis, hearing about the gathering, made an appearance, standing quietly at the back, listening as his students spoke. One by one, they shared their stories, moments of exclusion, instances of bias, subtle comments that had cut deeper than they could admit. As they spoke, the room felt charged with a new energy, a collective strength that came from knowing they weren't alone. J.𝗲𝗏 felt a surge of pride and relief. This was the beginning of something real. Principal Davis stepped forward at the end, addressing the room with a sense of purpose. "Thank you for sharing your stories. I hear you. And I promise, this school will be a place where every student feels seen and respected. Change won't happen overnight, but together, we can make it happen." The meeting sparked a series of changes within the school. Principal Davis initiated diversity training for all faculty, programs were implemented to promote inclusion, and students like J.𝗲𝗏 and Marcus were given a platform to continue advocating for fairness and equality. Mr. Smith, faced with the undeniable reality of his actions, began to change too. Over time, he became more self-aware, more conscious of his words, and his behavior shifted, though the journey was far from easy. As the school year came to an end, J.𝗲𝗏 felt a sense of accomplishment. She had endured the struggle, confronted the challenge, and emerged stronger. Her experience had left a mark on her, but it had also sparked change in her school and her community. She knew that the fight for equality was ongoing, that there would be more obstacles, more struggles. But she also knew that she had a voice, and she would use it. After the meeting, Principal Davis didn't just promise change, he took tangible steps. He formed a student committee dedicated to addressing racial equality and invited faculty members to participate. J.𝗲𝗏 and Marcus were at the heart of this committee, providing input on policies, brainstorming events to celebrate diversity, and helping plan workshops for students and teachers alike. Their voices, along with others, shaped every initiative. In the first committee meeting, J.𝗲𝗏 and Marcus shared their experiences openly, unfiltered, encouraging other students to share too. The group discussions were at times uncomfortable, forcing many to reflect on their own biases. But it was these raw conversations that laid the foundation for meaningful change. J.𝗏𝗏's peers began to see the school's unspoken rules and divides more clearly, and each story shared served as a wake-up call, bridging gaps that had once felt impossible to cross. Mr. Smith was required to attend these sessions. Initially reserved, he listened, his gaze fixed, wrestling with feelings of defensiveness and guilt. Yet, as he heard students recount their struggles, his perspective began to shift. One day, during a session where students were encouraged to give feedback, J.𝗏𝗏 gathered the courage to speak directly to him. She addressed the dismissal, the judgment, the assumptions he had made about her and others like her. She spoke without anger, but with conviction, expressing how his actions had impacted her confidence and sense of belonging. This confrontation was pivotal. Mr. Smith's usual composed demeanor faltered, and he apologized openly, his voice trembling. I didn't understand," he admitted, meeting Jada's gaze for the first time as more than just her teacher. "Thank you for telling me. I need to do better, and I will." As the months passed, changes became visible. Mr. Smith's classroom became a place where all students felt heard. He began encouraging diverse perspectives and discussions, often referring to examples of resilience and achievement from all backgrounds. He even invited guest speakers from different communities to discuss their careers and life experiences, broadening his students' views and fostering an inclusive learning environment. Outside the classroom, Jada and her peers felt the school's new commitment to cultural events, student-led diversity panels, and mentorship programs were introduced. Students from every grade began celebrating each other's accomplishments, creating a sense of unity and mutual respect. The school's environment had evolved into a place where individuality and community coexisted, where students like Jada and Marcus could thrive without fear of judgment. By the end of the school year, Jada's transformation was undeniable. Standing at graduation, she felt a sense of pride not only in her academic achievements but in the movement she had helped lead. As she received her diploma, Principal Davis looked on with pride, knowing his daughter and her classmates had pushed the school to become a better place. Jada left that school with a legacy, a reminder that courage and persistence could pave the way for change. The story of Jada and Mr. Smith didn't end with graduation. It became a part of the school's ongoing journey toward equality and understanding. And for every student who would follow in her footsteps, the walls that had once divided were now windows to a brighter future. As Jada walked away from her high school graduation, she felt the weight of everything she had accomplished. Her journey had been one of challenge, resilience, and growth, a path she hadn't anticipated but now wore proudly. The summer before college, she reflected on all that had happened, the friendships she had made, and the boundaries she had broken. Her experience at school, with Mr. Smith and her father's support, had left her with a powerful sense of responsibility. When Jada moved to her university campus, her advocacy didn't end. She joined groups committed to equality, mentoring younger students of color who felt as she once had, isolated, unseen. Her story had taught her the importance of sharing, of coming together to address injustice directly, and of speaking up, no matter the fear or uncertainty. At the university's Social Justice Coalition, Jada was not just a member, she quickly became a leader, her voice carrying the weight of her lived experience. Back at her high school, Principal Davis continued the work his daughter had inspired. He knew the issue of racial maltreatment would require constant attention and ongoing change, and he set up an annual review of policies and classroom practices, ensuring the progress they had made didn't lose momentum. Every year, Davis invited past students like Jada and her committee members back to speak about the impact they had made and how it was shaping their lives. Mr. Smith's story also evolved. With every passing semester, he became a model of growth in his teaching, sharing his own journey of transformation with other teachers who might need the same wake-up call he had received. He participated in workshops, openly admitting to his prior blind spots, and encouraged others to listen to their students' experiences. He knew it was easy to see one's own biases only when challenged directly, and he wanted his colleagues to see the value of self-reflection before it came at a student's expense. Meanwhile, Jada's old classmates, Marcus included, continued to honor the work they had done in high school. They organized reunions focused on maintaining and advancing the changes they had set in motion, using each gathering as a way to reflect on the past and look to the future. Marcus, inspired by Jada's strength and the challenges they had overcome together, started his own nonprofit in college, offering workshops in public high schools on understanding and overcoming racial biases. His experiences gave him a unique insight, allowing him to reach students and teachers alike in a way few could. The ripples of Jada's story grew broader. Eventually, news of her school's transformation was featured in an article in a national magazine, highlighting the shift toward racial awareness and empathy. Readers across the country learned about the impact a single student could make when supported by those willing to challenge the status quo. People saw that meaningful change was possible, not just in large protests or sweeping reforms, but in everyday interactions and small acts of courage that added up to lasting differences. For Jada, the journey had only just begun. She knew that fighting for equality required vigilance, compassion, and courage. And as she thought back to her time with Mr. Smith, she was reminded that change is rarely easy. It requires patience, humility, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Jada's story became one she shared often, each telling encouraging others to take up the call for fairness and respect, no matter their position or circumstances. Her high school story was now part of a greater narrative, a reminder of what's possible when voices are heard and lives are valued. Her journey had started in a classroom, but its impact had the potential to resonate far beyond its walls, inspiring generations to come. As 𝗕𝗂's story spread, it resonated with others who had faced similar challenges, many of whom reached out to her, sharing their own stories of facing prejudice in the classroom. 𝗕𝗂's inbox became filled with messages from students, parents, teachers, and even administrators. Some were notes of gratitude, expressing how 𝗕𝗂's courage had inspired them to speak up. Others were pleas for advice, asking how to navigate difficult situations with teachers, classmates, or school policies. 𝗕𝗂 took the time to respond to each message, knowing that these small exchanges could make a meaningful difference. She started hosting virtual gatherings for students to talk openly about their experiences and brainstorm ways to create change in their schools. Her high school story became the foundation of an ongoing dialogue, a community where voices came together, united in a shared mission to dismantle prejudice wherever it appeared. Principal Davis, seeing the powerful ripple effect of his daughter's advocacy, was both proud and inspired. In the years that followed, he collaborated with local and national educational boards to develop training materials that could be implemented in schools across the state. The training wasn't just about addressing overt racism but was designed to help teachers recognize and dismantle their own unconscious biases. His curriculum encouraged teachers to see each student as an individual, bringing their own unique perspectives, struggles, and strengths into the classroom. At the heart of the training, 𝗕𝗂's story was used as a case study. Participants would hear her journey, the challenges she faced, and the triumphs that followed. They'd then be asked to reflect on their own practices, to consider moments where they might have dismissed a student, made an assumption, or failed to recognize someone's full potential. By framing these reflections around 𝗕𝗂's experiences, the trainings became more than just workshops, they became personal calls to action for educators. 𝗕𝗂, meanwhile, expanded her influence by writing a book about her high school experience. The book was titled More Than Just a Seat in Class, a memoir and guide for students facing discrimination, and for teachers who wished to understand their roles more deeply. It was a candid, raw look at the impact of racism in schools but also a roadmap for growth, resilience, and change. The book was well received, becoming a bestseller and a staple in many teacher training programs. Her story became required reading in countless schools, encouraging reflection and action in every classroom it reached. As the years went on, her high school continued to evolve, each new graduating class building on the foundation she had laid. Students were now more aware of their voices and the power they had to demand respect and inclusivity. A scholarship was even set up in 𝗕𝗂's name, awarded to students who demonstrated resilience and leadership in promoting social justice and equity. Mr. Smith, who had once been at the center of 𝗕𝗂's struggles, became an advocate himself. His transformation was profound and visible, earning him respect not only from his colleagues but from students who saw him as a model of growth. He began mentoring new teachers, sharing his story with them openly and encouraging them to reflect on their own teaching styles, reminding them that growth was always possible. "We are all learning," he would say. And sometimes, our students are our greatest teachers. The final chapter of 𝗕𝗂's high school story took place when she returned as a guest speaker at a graduation ceremony several years after her own. Standing at the podium, looking at a sea of faces both familiar and new, she was struck by the diversity of the students in front of her. The changes were visible, not just in the composition of the student body but in the warmth, openness, and respect that filled the room. "Never underestimate your voice," 𝗕𝗂 began, her words carrying the same power and conviction she had discovered all those years ago. "Your voice matters. Your story matters. And sometimes, your courage to speak out can change more than just your own life, it can change an entire community." Her message was clear, her tone unwavering. She reminded the students that change is never easy but always worth pursuing. And with that, 𝗕𝗂 left them with a call to action, encouraging them to be bold, to be compassionate, and to fight for justice in every corner of their lives. The applause that followed her speech echoed throughout the hall, a standing ovation that was more than just appreciation. It was a sign of how much had changed since she had walked those same halls, a tribute to the legacy she had created, and a promise that her journey had inspired a new generation to take up the cause of equality and understanding. 𝗕𝗂's story would live on, not only in the pages of her book, not just in the memories of her classmates or in the policies of her high school, but in the countless lives she touched and the ripple effects she had set in motion, reminding everyone who heard her story that true change begins with a single, courageous voice. If 𝗕𝗂's story resonated with you, remember, stories like these remind us all of the power of standing up against prejudice and injustice. Every voice matters, and each of us has the potential to create change, whether it's in our schools, workplaces, or communities. If you found inspiration here or believe this is a story others need to hear, please consider liking this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. How would you have responded in Jada's shoes? And if you're passionate about uncovering real-life stories that challenge, inspire, and provoke change, make sure to subscribe for more. We're just getting started, and together, we can shine a light on stories that deserve to be heard. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.